Okay, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and get started. This is our first time trying a hybrid event with our a Zoom and our in-person. So thanks for your patience, especially to our folks on Zoom. What this will require is absolute silence in the room. or the best you can do to keep the noise down. All these crowd mics here will pick up what you're saying in the crowd, and that will muffle what our folks on Zoom are hearing. So I'm just gonna do a quick test with it a little quieted down in here. Teresa, can you hear us okay now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jess Lucero, and I'm the chair of the social work department. And I'm so glad to see so many of you here in person and also on Zoom. I think this really speaks to the interest in this topic, and especially the interest in supporting refugee youth in our communities. So thank you for being here. I want to give a quick thank you to our dean's office in the college, Cree and Julie especially, for helping us organize, and also to TCI. I think Dr. Walters is there in the back, who helps us organize these continuing education opportunities, especially Teresa Larson, who is on Zoom with us today as well. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to the Logan Library and our friends here for helping us get set up. The way we're going to run our session today is just as a panel. We've got one panelist on Zoom. Tirhas is on Zoom, so show up, I think, in the speaker when she pops into the audio sphere. And we've got three other panelists here with us. We have Sarah Bogosian, who is with Athletics United. Sarah's a clinical psychologist and has been with Athletics United for about 5 years. She's a psychologist at the Sorensen Center at USU. And we have Yannette Sandy, who is a USU student in her freshman year studying finance at USU. And Yannette is a former student who participated in Athletics United programming. And then we have Mike Spence here as well from Athletics United, who founded Athletics United 7 years ago in Cache Valley. And Mike has a long history in coaching and track coaching both in Oklahoma and at USU, and has brought that passion and love to youth empowerment and programming at Athletics United. Tirhas on Zoom is Tirhas. I hope I'm going to get your title right. I assume that I get it right. But Director of Partnerships and Programs, is that right? At Cache Refugee and Immigrant Connection. Whew, okay, that made me sweat for a minute. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to, I have an easy job. I'm just going to ask the question. And our panelists are going to share their expertise with the group. We'll have some time at the end for questions from both on Zoom, and Teresa will kind of collate some of those in the chat, and then also in the room. So I'm going to try to also manage time, which isn't nice on Zoom. I see some former students in the room, and you all will know that. Okay, so I'm just going to kick off with just a couple of introductory comments and say, I know we've got a statewide group here on Zoom, but we've got a local Cache Valley group here in the Logan Library. And I'd say what I'm going to share is relevant or specific to Cache Valley, but I think also relevant to the rest of the state, particularly along the Wasatch Front. In Cache Valley, we've seen a real growth in the refugee population in the last decade, especially more pronounced in the last 5 years. And we've seen a real diversification of the countries of origin, right? That folks are coming to Cache Valley initially as a secondary resettlement site, and now since let's see, Danny's over there, has it been 2 years or 1.5 as an official? 2 years as an official resettlement site, so it's primary resettlement here in Cache Valley. And so what we've seen then is a growth in the number of youth refugee in our local schools, and also, in community spaces. And we know that probably I would say the scale probably tips a little heavy in this room and on Zoom for social workers. And, you know, folks who may be working in schools, I see some of you around here, folks who are in nonprofit settings, mental health settings, right? So I think what we're trying to do as a panel is think broadly about helpers, right? And places and spaces and communities where you'll interact with new American youth, and how you can support them, right? So know that we're trying to apply that broad lens to this more specific issue. I'm gonna get us started with our first question. This one I'll lob to Mike to get us started. So Mike, this is about building trust in community spaces. How can community organizations and schools build trust with refugee families, particularly when there may be language barriers or cultural differences in views on authority or other?
Thanks, Jeff. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. First of all, make sure that they know that you're glad that they're here. I'm going to start out with that. You know, for first and foremost, make sure that they are glad that they know you're glad that they're here. Make them feel welcome, be engaging, enthusiastic, meet them where they are. I mean that both physically and linguistically. I know our organization, Athletics United, is really small. So I'm going to take this question to kind of address a little bit about how we got started and what we do. I used to be a track coach. I coached at the University of Oklahoma and Utah State University, and I stepped away from coaching in 2016. Within a year, I started this program because I missed the engagement, the youth engagement side of it. At the same time, I became aware that we have a vibrant refugee community here in Logan that I was not aware of. I was living in my own bubble in the athletic department at Utah State. And we all do that to a greater or lesser degree. We exist in a bubble. So when I wanted to engage with a population that I hadn't interacted with before, we met them where they were. We contacted CRIC, Cash Refugee and Immigrant Connection. We partnered with them on an event where they were engaging with the refugee community. We met at a local elementary school that was centrally located, walking distance from families. And we held a running practice. And we just ran on the grass, shoes or no shoes, had our first running practice, had snacks for the kids, and then we're there for them that day, and then came back the next week. The week after that, and the week after that. The big question was, is this going to have legs? Is it going to keep going? And it did. It grew from a couple dozen to 40, 50 kids within a year. And kids kept asking, "You're going to be here next week, right?" And yeah, we'll be here next week. We're not going anywhere. Can we do soccer too? Sure, we can do soccer too. Sarah started our soccer program. Yanette was one of our very first athletes, and it was right next to your house that we had our practices. We would walk kids to practice from home, walk them back home afterwards. But those two things, you know, meeting people where they are and showing up week in, week out, I think are crucial to showing that you care.
Awesome, thank you, Mike. Dear House, is there something that you'd want to add to what Mike shared here about building trust in community spaces?
Yes, Mike, thank you for sharing that. In addition to meeting them where they are, that consistent communication, persistence. I know depending on the boundaries for different community-based organizations and schools, this might be tricky, but I think what worked well with AU and the youth that are participating in those activities is more the long conversations we try to have with families. I have the opportunity to do home visits with Mike to the families of our youth groups. I think meeting them where they are, not just the communication wise, but also the place, the space. Going to their homes, in their living rooms, having a conversation with them, not just about the youth activity, not just about AU, but about anything. Also, there are a number of instances that AU parents they just want to have a conversation with whether it's a coach, a volunteer, or any participant. So engaging and the consistent communication, being there, listening. That's how we build trust, just to add on what Mike shared.
Thank you, Ross. Next question is for Yannette, around creating safe spaces for youth. Yannette, what makes a space feel safe and welcoming for refugee youth? And how can community organizations replicate these aspects that would encourage participation from youth?
Well,
Hello?
okay. So a safe space can be in person or in place, but truly a safe space to me is a judgmental free zone, right? So if you're asking yourself, how can I make a safe space for the youth, especially for the refugee youth? Ask yourself if you are a safe space yourself. Are you a better version of yourself when helping? Are you being patient? Are you being kind? Can you be someone who they can lean onto or look up to? A lot of people, especially the community helpers, they just focus on only one thing, but at some point they just don't realize that they themselves are being judgmental, and that can make you feel not safe anymore. It's not just the place, but you yourself. So I think that's the bigger question is, don't come in with an attitude because that will affect others and they won't want to will talk to you. But if you come in with positive kindness and just being yourself, that over time can become a safe space for everyone. An example is Athletics United. Yes, it started with Alice, but over time it just kept moving around. But that safe space moved around with them. I remember we went to this place that I had no clue, and I used to have social anxiety. But at that time, I never felt uncomfortable because I was a person that I could look up to and feel comfortable and feel safe. So yeah.
Thank you, Yannette. I know for our social workers in the room and on Zoom, we talk about that like use of self and how important that is as a practitioner, as a helper of using yourself in the intervention or in the interaction, right? So I love the way that you put that, Yannette. Let's talk a little bit about communication with families, right? A lot of times refugee youth are gaining language skills and their immersion in the school system and other places in the communities put them in this interesting kind of intersection between their parents and whatever the formal helping system is that they're navigating. And so let's start with Haas on this question about communication. What strategies have been effective for communicating directly with refugee families? And how can multiple pathways of communication be established to ensure that families feel included?
Well, I think what worked well with the strategies with communication for refugees is, I think, using multiple ways of communication, knowing that different levels of understanding of the families and more personalized information and sharing and communication methods. Some families might be comfortable enough to communicate with texts or even email, but not every family. And with increasing diversity in the education level and language proficiency of our community, I think it's always important to be intentional in the way to use communication. And one of the things that worked very well even during the pandemic is going through community advocates and community health workers or community builders who are already in the community, and engaging and involving them to help to bridge the gap, whether it's cultural misunderstanding or language barriers. So going to community through someone who is actually in the community, who is already trusted, it helps not just to get the trusted relationship, but also find ways to have the information go both ways. So basically using people who are already in the community engaging and involving people in the community, not just the youth, but also the families. There are already community members from the community who speak the language, who share the cultural understanding, who have shared experiences. So usually, always using those bridges to build the gap of miscommunication and misunderstanding.
That's fine.
I love that Terhas said that, having those liaisons who can help bridge the gap is crucial. I love that the school districts are incorporating that this year. I've had a couple of the community liaisons for Cache County School District recently, and I think that that's a huge difference maker to be able to, again, reach out and have that direct contact. I put down for my answer to this question, everything, all of it. As far as communication, we want to have, our organization, we are using text, we are using email, we are sending flyers home, we'll translate those flyers into a language parents can understand, but don't assume that those can be read in any language. So if it's really important, we get into the living room. And so having community partners with members of the community who already have that trust, like Renata said. The other thing about being in a living room, we recently did a youth focus group, and we talked about safe places with families. Number one safe place is home. So you want to have a level playing field and have a conversation where you have social parity with the other party. Do it at their home. It takes us out of our own comfort zone to do so, but you're putting the other party in theirs. So it's a great way to really reach people in a new way. And like Terhas said, really have two-way dialogue at that point.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to combine a question here that Mike and we're both going to, I think, focus on around language barriers and then also cultural dynamics. And you could speak to either one of these in speaking in just a time so we can get it covered here. So interested in how community helpers can be sensitive to intergenerational and cultural dynamics. Particularly when refugee youth might not feel comfortable discussing certain issues with their families. And then if there's anything that you wanted to add too about language barriers and more empowering approaches on that front. And we can start with you, Nina.
Okay, for the overcoming language barriers, so communication is important, right? And without communication, both parties will just never understand each other. So I always get confused when a parent is coming and the district knows about it, but they never get a translator in the meeting. It's just it's empowering to have a translator where you can have your language and your point both ways. Having a church translate for you is so disempowering. Having your kid who's running around trying to get your point or using broken language so your kid can understand, it's not ideal for the parent or for the person who's trying to listen. So why don't you have a translator? It's that simple. The middleman should be a professional translator, not a kid who you may or may not rely on, or you may or may not understand if it's going through. So yeah, it's just that simple. Get yourself a professional translator when talking to a parent.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, fortunately, I can report that we've been making good progress in this area. I sat in on an academic meeting this week where one of our local guidance counselors did a terrific job, made the parent feel welcome, had a translator on the phone immediately within 2 minutes. It worked seamlessly. They got the correct dialect, and we were able to have a really important discussion around academic future and athletic participation in particular. And this was important because it gets to that second part about discussing certain issues where there's a cultural dynamic. And we had to navigate a parent who was not comfortable with athletic participation because they saw it as an either or with academics or athletics. And in this case, Really important to be a listener and to be respectful both of, the parents' perspective, the parents' culture, and also appreciative of the tremendous stress that places on a student trying to exist in both of these worlds, trying to satisfy the peer expectation of participating in sports without any limitation, but also a parent, trying to be part of their parents' world too and obey, the priorities that they have. Again, this counselor did a wonderful job explaining, listening first, and then just pointing out that there are a lot of students, this was at Logan High School, who succeed in both, and that they often see that kind of success go hand in hand, where athletics and academics can be mutually supporting. And also to point out something new, that this is someone who was headed to college, that sometimes colleges look at this too, to show that you were more than just a student. And I think it was a gentle way to present this information without being pushy. Say, this may actually enhance your child's opportunity at the next level too. And we were able to reach a compromise at the end of that, where I think everyone was satisfied. Maybe not everything they wanted out of it, but satisfied. Perfect compromise.
Mike, hold on to the mic.
Sure.
I wanted to hear your thoughts on transportation challenges. Transportation is a common barrier in broader social services and helping professions. And there's, I think, some unique challenges within refugee communities. Can you share any innovative or community-based solutions that have worked to ensure that refugee youth have access to resources and support?
Yeah, so transportation right away was our biggest issue. Even though we met right next to where a lot of the youth lived, we had a lot of people who wanted to be involved but lived across town. So one of the first things we did was institute a carpool program for Athletics United. And we have kind of two tiers of participants. We have volunteers who show up and coach at a given practice and mentor. If you want to be a driver, you go through a second level of background check, and we talk a little bit about what expectations are as a driver transporting kids across town. That was something we were hesitant to become involved with at first, be blunt. We were a little concerned about how are we going to manage this, how do we handle this extra responsibility. It has, without a doubt, been one of the most impactful and important parts of our program, and that's for a variety of reasons. So we have kept that and grown that program ever since. It gives us contact points with parents, impromptu meetings when we walk kids to their door, say hello to mom and dad, make sure everything's okay, check in with them. We encourage our drivers to do that. Go on an empty stomach because you're going to be invited in for food and a cup of tea. So it's great quality time with families. It's also a really good time to talk in the car. Our practices have been described as delightful chaos, heavy on the chaos. But car time, we actually get to have meaningful conversations. We have a tutoring program here at the library that came from a conversation in the car on the way home. We drove by the library one day, and I just pointed it out and said, do you guys get to the library often? They had never been. Do you have a library card? No. They didn't know about the resources available through the library. So the next week we set up a library night designed to get parents in here to get their library cards. That grew into our tutoring program, which now meets twice a week, and we're hoping to expand that going forward. So lots of meaningful connection, conversation, and just fun conversation. That connection happens there.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that, Mike. And I'll just say, back on a thought here, back to where you started with this response around, you were nervous at first, and one thing that I've observed in social services broadly is how sometimes we bump up into concerns about liability and conventional ways of doing things. And
oftentimes the folks that we're trying to serve that have unique needs and, you know, different vulnerabilities and just different are going to benefit if we just try to innovate a little bit and think outside the box, because there's a way to do it. There's a way to, you know, to make sure that your organization is still protected in the way that it needs to be, but that you're able to adapt your approaches so they're more culturally responsive. So let's go to Sarah with this next question. So this is about authentic relationship building and also what we sometimes have heard of as like a white savior or saviorism kind of complex, right? So what are some effective approaches, Sarah, to engaging refugee parents in their children's education or in broader service provision? Excuse me, I started to give you the wrong question. How can volunteers and service providers approach their roles without falling into that complex, Sarah? What does authentic relationship building look like?
I have so much to say about this, it's gonna come off. I have a little fancy on this one, but I guess I'll start by saying that our best volunteers at Athletics United are the ones that just show up, and listen, and engage and stay curious. And you know, one of the things that I've taken from my training as a psychologist over into my work in the community is this idea that I might be the expert on psychology, but you're the expert on you. Like, I'm not an expert on you, you are. And so when I show up at Athletics United, when I hang out with the kids, I assume that they're the experts on that and on what they need. And I'm kind of lucky because we're kind of all around, and just the best. And so that cuts through, I think, a lot. So I think in our school, like, you know, decided to, you know, talking about, you know, messy versus solid or whatever. So you don't have like that exact thing to cut through. But I think I have a conversation with every volunteer when I show up for soccer practice, and the first thing I say is like, if you're here to say that, probably this is not the place you go. These kids have way more to teach you than you have to teach them. Kids listen, and I think one of the coolest things I've gotten to do is I volunteered to drive kids to and from running practice. And when I first started volunteering, it's listening to my grandfather was a refugee and someone to grow in this country, and I had long wanted to engage with this community. I on the west side, I've seen these families, but I couldn't figure out how to like, I don't know, like, hi. And so volunteering with Athletics United and getting to be a driver was really like a thing in my life because I got to and so I would pay in the spaces that you're working in, slow down. I think if you try to impose your services upon people, they are not well received, right? People can tell you what they need, they can tell you what their questions are, you know, like, and they can ask for what they need, and slow down, listen, stay curious, and remember that you're only the expert on like social work and teaching and psychology in my case. And so you have like a teensy little piece of helpful for people, and you'll get as much as you give.
Thank you, Sarah. I think this is a good segue to your house when we're thinking about supporting empowerment and avoiding top-down approaches. Your house, you talked about two-way communication earlier. Now we're thinking about how organizations structure their services in ways that empower refugee youth and families rather than creating top-down or one directional dynamic. What thoughts do you have on that, to your house?
Yes. So yeah, I think most of as providers or as service providers, we usually come up with projects or ideas or services, and the way we deliver those services is usually a more humanitarian aid framework where there is a direct dynamic of we are providers and there is a recipient of the services, and this might not be like only about youth service providers. But I think involving refugee youth and any family members and making sure that giving them the space to participate, be in the table, including in the planning, organizing, leading, whether it's a simple cultural event or a program to address their needs. I think giving them the sense of ownership and giving them the opportunity to be in the table, not just to identify the needs in the community, but also to bring community solutions. Also, some mentorship programs that kind of intentionally encourage members from the community who have gone through similar pathways to be mentors, to lead study groups, and maybe a kind of a space for experience sharing, so other youth groups can learn from a young person or a person who went through similar pathways and help them understand how to navigate the systems. It's a more empowering approach, not just giving them the idea that these are the services, this is how we do things, this is how you integrate into the community, this is how you be successful in school, instead of top-down approach that us as providers telling them this is how you can thrive, you can do better. Involving them in those conversations and making them part and parcel of the decision-making table is, I think, the approach that all of us as providers or any community spaces should work on.
Let's go back to Mike and Sarah, and this is about cultural competency in service delivery. How can service providers better educate themselves about the countries and cultures of the youth that they're working with, and without placing that burden of education on the youth themselves?
Really quick, can I interrupt? Sarah, can you speak a little louder when you answer this question?
No one has ever told me to speak during my whole life. We didn't change. It's okay. All right. Tell me if this isn't loud enough. So in my professional world, cultural competence is often talked about as knowledge, attitude, and skills. And my students who back in the 80s, and it's held up pretty well. And one of the things that I find, particularly with working with the refugee youth that we serve in Athletics United, is on any given topic like this, we've got 11 different focusing on the pitch, right? And it behooves me, if I really care, to show up knowing a little bit about those countries, a little bit about those cultures, and then hold that loosely, right? Because what the video can take me so far. But it's helpful to know a little bit about the communities that we're serving. And, I always hold with a grain of salt anything I read about what a culture is like, because you gotta hold that really light, because no community I've ever worked with is a monolith. But I can learn about the geopolitical history, right, of the place that the kids I'm working with are coming from. And honestly, the Athletics United, they have kids from cultures right now whose countries are at war. Like, there was active genocide perpetrated in one culture that you got kids coming from on another culture. So, let's just know a little bit about that. Because the kids are navigating that, and we're friends. Right? They're navigating that, their parents are navigating that. And I think it's really important for me to say and remember that we have this attitude commonly in the US that everyone should just be grateful to be here. Well, like most refugees would rather be safely at home. At least my family would have to stay safely in the Middle East, and we couldn't. So we had to come here. Yay, we got safely. But kind of recognizing that history is really important, and the people you're working with should need to teach you the basics, right? And so you can learn a lot just by Googling the countries that the people you're working with are coming from, the cultures, the faiths, right? And and then hold that lightly and be curious. And then in terms of attitudes, I think that's that humility, that curiosity, that just learning and meeting, and in the skills, that's what you get, right? From whatever your profession is, whatever your trade is, but recognizing that most of what we learn in grad school, most of what we learn in college, was studied on by and for middle class white people. And so teaching strategies, counseling strategies, I could go on, like just the whole was loosely and recognize that tweaks may be necessary to really working within the culture. And I think one of the things we're noticing recently is we've had a little bit of a shift in some of our practices from a whole bunch of kids who are kind of coming from one region of the world, and like we've had a bunch of kids coming in from another region of the world. And we've had to kind of shake things up a little bit because the kids from this other region, like they're wanting something a little bit different, they're needing something a little bit different. And if we get stuck in, we know what we're doing in Athletics United, like we're gonna alienate those kids, and they're right. So like we have to like expand.
Yeah, I love what Sarah said, that we have more to learn from a lot of the people that we work with, and we have to impart. I would say become a global citizen. I'm a learner. I love learning new things about history, about geopolitics. One of the quick story, one of the first practices that we got flags of to represent all the countries of kids that participated. One of the flags we had was the flag of Somalia. And there were some kids I knew were from Somalia that weren't taking the Somali flags. And I had to ask, I was like, why aren't you using these? And one of the boys said, well, I'm not from there. I'm from Somaliland. And I was like, Dad, you made that up. And the United States does not recognize Somaliland. I looked it up, and there's geopolitics after World War II, and a couple of countries were put together, and they are a sovereign country, but not recognized all around the world. And that stuff is fascinating, and we should know it, and especially for people from there. I was grouping him in as being a young man from Mogadishu. That's not where he's from. And but rather than become sheepish about that, my own ignorance on the issue, that became a great bonding point between us. I wanted to know more. I went home and researched, and we had long conversations about it afterwards, which is a part of it too. Do your research, but don't be afraid to ask questions either, because connection is key, and that's a great opportunity where you can again level the playing field where you are actually learning something from them. And that's quite empowering. Yeah.
I like how you said don't be afraid to ask. Because if you do ask and see their faces how happy they are and you're interested in them. You kind of just guess and kind of, okay, like you can stop asking me then because what's the point? But I remember when you did that flag and all my friends were talking about, oh my gosh, our flag is here and we are recognized and that can bring joy. So again, I feel like to emphasize, don't be afraid to ask. It really truly does bring happiness.
I love his response to this question. Mike, something that you said stand out to me of instead of being sheepish, is the word you used, and to add to what Yannette is saying about not being afraid to ask, and what Sarah is saying about curiosity. I think that's one thing in this space when we're thinking about cultural competence and being culturally responsive. There's a fearfulness of missteps, right? But with genuineness and with kindness and with like authenticity and a real like desire to know someone and understand someone, you can keep proceeding and not stay kind of either stuck in the fear of making a mistake or or shutting down, and because nobody benefits from that, right? I think we've got time probably for just one more question before we open up for Q&A. And so I'm gonna kind of combine one, and this is, I'm gonna combine probably the collaboration and then our question about Kathy Sherman. Some of you might know Kathy Sherman from Ellis. I think now retired from Ellis. Made a really significant impact by creating a supportive environment for refugee youth. And when we're thinking about both like informal and formal spaces, and how youth can feel welcome, whether that's in schools or more formal organizations. And then also thinking about how Kathy was, in building those supportive spaces. Mike, let's start with you. What can other educators, community members, service providers, do to kind of emulate or learn from that kind of work?
Well, in the case of Kathy, she embodied those two things of embodied these two things, meeting people where they are and showing up. And I heard her name all the time when we were at Ellis. She was one of our first big collaborators. She welcomed us to the facility at Ellis Elementary. We were just practicing in the grass field. This is the old school before they remodeled it, and we knew we were using this school as public space, which is so important because it's centrally located there. It's a place that the kids felt safe. Rather than confront us on this issue, Kathy right away said, let's combine our efforts. We want you guys to be here earlier and tie in with our after-school program so that we can make a seamless transition. Collaboration at its best is that, again, meeting people where they are, coming out and having those conversations. Here at the library, this is one of the most valuable resources that our community and those who are joining from around the country, each one of you in your community, having this safe public space, it's not to be taken for granted. This is a publicly accessible building that has tremendous resources and that anyone can go to and be a part of. When the library was gone, under construction, it left a gaping hole in our community. Our tutoring program, we made it work. We shuffled from here to there to kind of keep some continuity and have those touch points, but it was hard. We're very thankful to be back here in a new beautiful facility. These spaces are crucial to building community. We need as many of them as we can get. We need more of them. But schools and libraries are key there. They should not be taken for granted, and they need to be. I keep saying this is what this is all about: safe spaces. Yannick said it in the beginning. It needs to be a judgment-free zone. Especially these, make these spaces available outside of traditional hours. A lot of times at school, for example, you have a lot of pressure to get certain things done and accomplish, we're results oriented. As much as we can create time and space to really get to know each other and not have that results driven agenda, where you can really ask questions and be curious. Quick story about the importance of this. One young man that we worked with early on quickly got into disciplinary trouble at school. I recently had a talk here with the library about restorative justice practices. Really, what that means for those who don't know is getting to the why of certain behaviors. I was at an expulsionary hearing for this young man who I had worked with for years. And I watched his transition from really a terrific young man participating in our program to being on the verge of expulsion from high school. It was not until the expulsionary hearing that someone asked him the question of where his propensity for violence and violent conduct, fighting in school came from. And the answer to the question was back to when he was 5 years old and had to fight his way home with the money he made from shining shoes in refugee camp to be able to buy food for his family. And everyone got quiet and was realizing that his programming, his fight or flight reaction was completely different than anything anyone expected. And the labels that he had received throughout his childhood were based on trauma that he had experienced at a really young age and that had shaped everything that came after. If that question had been asked when he was 10 years old, he would have had a totally different trajectory in life. We need these spaces to have these conversations before we get locked into that punitive pattern. I think I just addressed 3 different questions.
That's perfect, thank you, Mike. So we've got about just under 10 minutes left, and I wanted to reserve that much space for some Q&A. So Teresa, if you can help with us on Zoom, you can throw some questions in the chat. I'll also just kind of walk around here. It looks like we've got a couple here. We can start with Helga.
Yeah, so I would like people to address to me the issue of boundary setting. So how do you set boundaries to fight burnout?
What was the last? Sorry,
To avoid burnout in volunteerism.
Good.
The $1 million question.
Yeah. So our volunteer model is, we cast a really wide net. We have a lot of different relationships with different organizations at Utah State. We rely on the university and our partnership there when we talk about collaborative, relationships. That's a big one for us. Young people have a lot of energy, which is good. But there are 2 things that I would say. Certainly, you need to make sure that volunteers feel appreciated for the work that they're doing, especially the ones that you really rely on, the ones who are coming again and again. That's where those connections really are built. We try to do, for me as a director, we try to have some space that we recognize our volunteers above and beyond, our normal gathering times, and do little things, a dinner, a gift certificate, something like that to say thank you. But ultimately, that's the best volunteers we've had. Let's get back to the carpool in a way. It needs to be that you're getting as much from the relationship as we're giving to it. And our best volunteers have really gotten it. We work in a really special space where we are building relationships. And so, like Sarah said, if you're doing it right, if you are curious and you're engaging in that way, this should be forming a mutually beneficial relationship with another family. It should be bringing to you the same benefit that any friendship brings. That makes you feel. Our tagline for Athletics United is building community through sport. And I used to think of that when we first started as more of a top-down building of community. What I didn't expect, but realized quickly was I was building my own community. I was more connected with Logan than I had ever been before. For the first time, Logan really began to feel like home. So it was by getting involved, it wasn't all one directional, me giving of myself. I realized all of my relationships were coming from Logan. So I was getting more in return than I was putting out.
I'll add to that. I think I'm a little more burnout at work than I am at home. But I went through a patch this last year where I was coming home from soccer practice with the kids, just wrecked, and I was okay. And I hadn't been feeling that way before. And I had to really take a look at kind of what I was bringing to it, but also like some of the decisions that had been made and how I set it up. And, I had picked a day that wasn't good for my life, and I was resenting it, right? And we didn't have enough volunteers coming, and I didn't feel like I was able to keep the kids safe. And we were driving the kids to practice, and they weren't staying to practice. And so my mom anxiety was all over the place, like, we're picking these kids up at the door, and they're trying to think they're with us, and they're not with us. And so I called the board meeting here, I called up Mike and Christy, and was just like, help me think through, because if I'm not feeling good about this, then I'm not doing it right, and so we thought through it, and we made some changes, and kind of beefed up volunteer recruiting, switched to a night that worked better for everybody, and had some conversations with parents about, like, we can't, your kid isn't staying in practice, so we're not gonna give them a ride, and so you need to bring them for a couple of weeks, just like having those conversations, what would work better? Because I think if volunteering is draining you, like, I think they're important questions to be asking yourself, because I don't think I can show up and be a safe space if I'm like so stressed. Right, and I think I wasn't, to be honest with you. I think there was a patch of weeks there where I wasn't in safe space with the kids because I was like, I was so worried that something bad was going to happen when the kids under my watch. Well, you girls weren't thinking about that. You're like, why is Coach Sarah being so bonkers today? Right? And so, like, I had to really sort myself so that I could show up and be that safe space.
So, thanks. I think we had a question over here.
Thanks. So I'm a social work major at the school, and I work within the school district. And there are several elementary age youth that I work with that are refugees that I know would benefit from your program. I got some great notes from you guys so far. I really appreciate that. So this question is kind of a two-part. The first one is, I don't know a lot about athletics. Are there services for elementary age youth that we could refer these to? The second part is being an effective liaison, as what's been discussed. I can't, in my practicum, and these teachers at the school can't ethically drive these kids to the events. And so my question is how can we, within the school district or other professional settings, become effective liaisons with you guys and have an effective handles?
Yeah, thanks for that one too. So Athletics United is, first of all, it's free and open to everyone. I should have said at the outset, our club is not a refugee running club. Our club is open to anyone in the community. In fact, we did a demographic study last year. 60% of our participants are Native Cash Valley families. But we have, since our inception, actively introduced and engaged with the refugee community to make sure that this was a safe space for them. So, and age-wise, we have from 4 years old to 18. So, and then if you're over 18, you're there as a coach. So it's really all ages. In fact, we've had toddlers there on the jungle gyms all the time. So there is no, everyone is included. As far as, so everyone's invited, everyone is free to anyone. This is actually not a very difficult model to recreate. For those of you around the state, we have always envisioned this happening other places too. So a similar type program, in fact, similar type programs need to exist. We count on contacts like we're making today. This is my dream, being here talking to everyone, being able to educate up like this and really inform about what opportunities are available. And spreading the word. Volunteers are key. We get something different from every group that we work with. Utah State students bring a special energy and connection. They connect with the kids in a different way because of proximity and age. From parents who have their own children, they participate together, they can carpool together, they can bring a family with them. So a lot of times that's where our carpool comes from. Sometimes from students, but a lot of time from families that have their own kids and can pick up and spend time together as a family. And the best is when they start interacting and having play dates outside of practice. So we'll recruit from populations like that. We have people who are retirees and just want to keep giving back to their community and have time and capacity to help out with being drivers and again getting to know a community that otherwise you're not sure how to get outside your comfort zone and go and interact with. So running is a great icebreaker, but it can be anything. So make the handoff. We'll worry about the logistics of getting people to practice, and we'll keep building out that driver pool. And if you are someone in that position to become a driver or participate in a group like ours somewhere else in the state or through CRIC locally, do that.
Awesome, thank you, Mike. I think that's a great place for us to end. We're right at our hour together. Teresa, do you have any announcements that you need to make?
Yes, I am about to put up a QR code That is a link to the continuing education evaluation. In order to get continuing education, you do need to complete this evaluation. It is also in the Zoom chat for folks that are on Zoom. And this link will be open for about a week and a half. So as long as it's done before then, you will receive your continuing ed.
Awesome, thank you, Teresa. Did you have something?
Just gonna make sure you.
Yes, absolutely. So when Teresa sends out the email that will go out to all participants, we'll have a little bit more additional contact information and connections with some of our panelists here between Crick and Athletics United. I'll just say thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate our folks on Zoom and then also here in the room. I think it was really meaningful to be able to be in one of these community spaces for this discussion. So thanks for joining us in person. I will also say please get some food on the way out the door for the folks that are here in Logan. We have plenty of food left. And last thing I'll say is, you know, we have the room and the space for a bit. So if I can speak for my panelists here, we'll stick around for a little bit and chat and have some of those one-on-one conversations with folks who are interested. Thank you so much.